They're doing a clinical trial, but do you know about Fragile X in 1982? 1982, all we had was a cytogenetic marker. We just had something, you kind of cooked someone's blood, the white blood cells, and you saw a little funny pinch in the end of the X chromosome, which itself was a purely serendipitous finding originally. And so we didn't know the sensitivity or specificity of this marker, but we did see that it was associated with a risk for cognitive and intellectual and developmental disability. And that marker seemed to be segregating in families in an X-linked manner. So it got that name Fragile X because of that little pinch. And so we were doing a study of a medication in autism that, by the way, didn't work, like many, many medications in autism. But a little boy wandered into my office who ended up participating in this study. And I had read about Fragile X recently, and I kind of looked at him sideways and frontways and from all possible angles, and I said, I'll bet you this kid's got Fragile X. And I was right, and he had an incredibly interesting family. And again, Mike, you'll like this story because he had uncles and aunts who seemed to both be affected cognitively, developmentally. But in this family that was based in the Washington, D.C. area, Baltimore area, anytime that intellectual cognitive disability seemed to occur, it co-occurred with a very, very serious mood disorder of bipolar type. So I thought, wow, this is, I didn't really think this, but kind of Nobel Prize territory, right? I'm going to find out one of the causes of bipolar disorder. Well, this family turned out to be an anomaly. In fact, the Fragile X marker co-segregated with the phenotype for bipolar disorder or variants in the Washington, D.C. based branch. But there were two other branches of the family, one that was down in Florida, which only had the Fragile X phenotype, and another branch up in New York that only had the bipolar phenotype. So there went my Nobel Prize or whatever. But it definitely, again, through serendipity, got me involved in the field because it was a fascinating family. Got to know them, have known them for decades, as well as other families. And it was an exciting, heady time back then because not long after I first got in the field, the gene was discovered for Fragile X, within 10 years. And like many genetic discoveries, we thought, okay, we have the gene, we're going to get the cure not long after. And those weren't strange or psychotic thoughts. We were really all very excited about that. But here we are in 2015, and we're not curing anybody in Fragile X, much less in any intellectual developmental disability, aside from, and it's not really a cure, phenylketonuria. We can pretty much prevent about 90% of the intellectual and developmental disability in kids. So if you look at your Diet Coke cans, it'll say phenylketonurics, beware. It's because it's got aspartame in it, and aspartame is aspartic acid, and phenylalanine is an essential amino acid, and if you have PKU, you're missing the enzyme that processes and metabolizes that amino acid properly. And so it's not good to drink Diet Cokes if you have phenylketonuria, but pretty much we're not making the type of impact that we want to make in this field particularly for Fragile X, or for that matter, for any of the disorders that we study. And so the second annual symposium, which we're attending today, is all about trying to think about how we can push that envelope, how we can, 20 to 30 years from now, have a completely different perspective on patient outcome. I hope, I'm still around in 20, 30 years. I hope I'm not a disgruntled, honorary Stanford retired professor who's thinking, oh my God, we haven't made any progress. And I see these two things in parallel. So let me just tell you, before anyone thinks I'm saying, okay, all of our resources should go towards bleeding edge, basic science type of work. I think a significant proportion of our resources should go there. But in parallel with the type of work that we need to perform on the research side as well as the clinical side, that iterates, that does progress from our current models and helps us take care of our patients better now, but at least an equal effort to really revolutionize how we take care of our patients and work with our families 20 to 30 years from now. And I don't see any conflict from those two tracks occurring in parallel. Sometimes people get threatened with that. I was just at another meeting for another disorder, and there was definitely a contingent of individuals who were saying, you can't do all that basic science stuff because it'll suck all the resources away from what we need to do right now to help families right now. And the other contingent was saying, if you don't do the basic science work, the fundamental work to improve understanding, to build those, to identify those building blocks of a better understanding, we're going to be stuck. We're going to be stuck in this circular pattern of just slightly iterating. And I said, with my best peacemaking voice, these two things not only can, but they should coexist side by side. And so I'm hoping today our speakers talk about how they exist side by side, or at least promoting one side or the other without any precedent or obvious priority for one or the other. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Rachel Riley and I have worked together for 4 years? 6 years? So I might be getting closer to that retired Stanford professor moment. And Reiko's going to give a report on the first symposium last year, where it was more open, and we just had a lot of brainstorming about the intellectual developmental disabilities field in general. It wasn't focused on Fragile X. But she'll also tell you why we decided this year to focus on Fragile X.